Hi friends, Marc Mandel here. Welcome to episode number 1 of Customer Experience Under the Hood, a brand new show that I'm excited to share today with you guys and to see where it goes from there. Let me tell you what Under the Hood's about as we get started, because it is a brand new show that has had no prior example here. You know, a lot of people talk about customer experience technologies, all the technical stack that sits in our typical software workflows, except that most of us spend a lot of our time talking about these things from a business application standpoint. We talk about what these tools do. We talk about, in some cases, what they look like or kind of the output of them, but in a very business-centric way. That's not this conversation. Today, the purpose of this conversation is going to be to really get under the hood and really, as I say, kind of geek out for 20 or 25 minutes that we're together here in these areas. You know, I'll give you a little bit of background on kind of where the show came from. I'm a car guy. I love cars, and one of the things I love to do is watch television shows about cars. And you probably have heard of a couple of these shows, whether it be the Jay Leno show called Jay Leno's Garage, or there's a show called Top Gear. These are shows where you can really geek out about car stuff and talk about the features of what made a certain car what it was. I want to do something like that with this type of technology. And I couldn't find an example of a show like that existing. Coming along a little further, you guys know, you've heard me talk about one of my partner companies, a company called Luminoso, before, a company that I really respect and admire. We've spent a lot of time, the Luminoso team and I, talking about how do we explain AI and natural language processing and what role does generative AI play in all this stuff. And we were working on their website recently, and we made a decision to say, let's take all the stuff on the website that's the heavy stuff, the technical stuff, the things that folks that are data scientists or data engineers or AI engineers really care about. And we put that aside, and we called it kind of the nerds page. And what I want to do for purposes of this, we'll call it this show here, is have a show that lives on that nerds page. I want to be able to put together content that will resonate and will make sense for people who care passionately about what's going on under the hood in their technology. For this very first episode, we're going to spend a lot of time really unpacking AI. Because, guys, let's just call it what it is. There's no bigger, hotter, more prevalent topic right now in technology than AI. What role does AI play with customer experience work? Is this about enabling customer-facing AI or internal-facing AI as an enabler? What role does GenAI play versus other things? And that's going to be what we dig into here today for the next 20 or so minutes. To do that, I've asked a couple of my good friends to join me. So I'm going to bring them onto the call here and now, and then we're going to start to ask them to introduce themselves, and we're going to have a good conversation, the three of us, and we'll see where it really goes. So let me introduce first Kim and Tom. Kim is a legitimate expert in AI and data science. She works at that company I mentioned, Luminoso, and she's going to be here today to talk a lot about the things that she's learned in her, is it now roughly 10, 11 years, Kim, that you've been in this space between the two companies that you've been with?
Text analytics and CX the whole time.
Yep. And Tom, you're a partner of Luminoso's at your company, at CAPS Group, and your name is Tom Ramey, and we've asked you to join today because as an important partner, but more so an industry guy, you not only know the narrow kind of lane that Kim sits in, other companies like hers as well that you've seen over the years, may have engaged with, and I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of have a point counterpoint conversation between the three of us, just based on what we know about our industry experience and things like that. So guys, we're here for purposes of this conversation. We're here to be really blunt and straight about it. So Kim, could I ask you to take 2 minutes just to give a little bit more about who you are? Then Tom will ask you to do the same.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Kim Larson. I have a background in economics and international development, and that led me to CX research because I learned the best development and the most sustainable development is one that is informed by customers, informed by the people involved in participating in it. And that is what led me to Luminoso, because Luminoso has a uniquely dynamic natural language understanding engine. I'm sure we may touch on that later, or you may already know. And it learns the way humans do. So we have to understand how humans learn language through immersion and through training as a hybrid. So we get to play with a lot of psychology things as we make real, meaningful changes.
Fantastic. And Tom, can you jump in and offer the same about you?
Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. I've been in text analytics now for about 20 years. I started a company, actually I started two, that's doing text analytics development, and we've been doing auto categorization, data extraction, sentiment analysis, using a variety of different software. And one of the reasons that we're partnering with Luminoso is because their software is really good. And so what we've been doing, I have a network of consultants, and we do development of the basic platform underlying text analytics. And I also am the host of or program chair for Text Analytics Forum, which is a conference I started about 8 years ago.
Terrific. Thank you guys for being here. So I thought I would open up the conversation by doing what I like to do. I like to be a little bit of a troublemaker. You know, my mother used to call me an agitator. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys just a big open question, and then we're going to try to just riff on this together, the three of us. And that's about ChatGPT. And I'm going to just pick on those guys for a minute, but I'm using them more as an example of generative AI. And my question for you guys is really, you know, with all the momentum that generative AI and particularly ChatGPT has these days, is it a foregone conclusion that they've just won this space and they're going to own it? And is that all we really need? Or do we need other tools today to get the job done? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about pros and cons, what you see, what you hear, what makes sense and doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so I'll say Tom and I did a webinar on this not too long ago. So if folks want to see what that is in depth, we have that posted on our Luminoso channel, and we'll post the other two parts on it. But Tom, do you want to go first? Because I think you explained it really well in that video.
Okay, so GenAI is an amazing technology. We have to admit that. But what I'm seeing now is more and more companies are trying to actually figure out how to actually make money off of this stuff. How do we use it to really improve our companies? And they're finding it's really difficult because ChatGPT and other generative AI technologies are really good at some things. And they're really good at being creative. They're good at summarizing certain things. They're good at creating rough drafts or starting. But the end result is not very good. And one of the big reason is that they're trained on public-facing content of all kinds. And when you try to incorporate that into an enterprise vocabulary is radically different from what you find in the public sphere. And so what you get is, in every case, so the technology, of course, is based on predicting the next word. That's really the whole foundation. That and some transformers and whatnot. But it's basically trying to figure out what's the most likely next word. Well, the most likely next word is the most popular word that they've been trained on. And we know for a lot of different areas, the most popular is very often kind of superficial, and it's not really a good in-depth answer.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would elaborate on that. What Tom identified as the draft of an answer, I would identify as the easy answer, right? It's really good at solving the blank page problem, but in the field of data science and AI, and if you're trying to do something meaningful for the future and get ahead, it's really important to be based in like the reality. And part of getting that genuine, real data is grounding that effort in the effort of asking. So to Tom's point, you can do the type ahead, what's been said before, but if you're trying to prepare for uncertain futures, like no one expected March of 2020 to happen the way it did in November of 2020 or 2019. And so having those listening posts with specific questions that allow insights to be generated, because no one knows how I feel about something until they ask me. Right? They may be able to speculate based on my behavior, based on the other metadata associated with me, how I might act, but there's really no substitute for collecting the real data in the first place.
So let's break this down a little bit, one level deeper. In the old days, we used to talk about two camps: natural language processing, and to a certain extent, natural language generation. It's kind of NLP, NLG. And to me, it sounds like the strength of the large language model use cases is natural language generation, or generating original or semi-original or derivative content. But it's not going to play to the strength of understanding, a corpus of data, a piece of text. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? I mean, is that a fair kind of way to chop it in half and say there's a place for each, and it's not the same place? I mean, how do we subdivide this?
Yeah, I mean, the subdivision, I think, I mean, it's a significant subdivision, but what we're seeing is that the way to get the most out of both is not coming down on one side or the other, or doing one side or the other, but how do you put them together? How do they interact? Hybrid models of both NLP and NLG, as well as actually having a human in the loop as well. So those kinds of hybrid models are being producing much better results than either any of those three by themselves.
I want to be careful and thoughtful about some of the terms that were thrown around, because one of the things I said in the invitation for our listeners to join us today is we're going to try to unpack and explain NLP, NLU, generative AI, RAG, all the acronyms. We're in an acronym-rich environment right now.
Yep.
Right? And maybe it's best to take a moment and say, what is NLP? How is it same or different than NLU? How is that? What is RAG, and what role does RAG play in this space? What's a model? Let's just kind of lay it out. If we could take a couple of minutes and just kind of play Webster's dictionary and just explain what some of these things are.
Okay.
Either of you want to just take a stop at that? Let's say, natural language processing, or NLP, versus, let's say, natural language understanding of NLU. Are they exactly the same? Is one a subset of the other? What's the deal?
Okay. I'll take a quick jump at it, and which is that I mean, NLP is a very established technology that has been used to do a lot of what we call standard text analytics kind of applications. What's a document about? Categorizing the document, finding all the important pieces of the document. What are the data that you can find in there? Natural language understanding is more of an internal facing, how do we understand language, as opposed to just simply going out and understanding it and building something that understands it. So auto-categorization, for example, we do a lot of that, can be done in two different ways. One is with machine learning, which is the sort of older definition, or the basis of the older definition of AI.
Okay.
And the other is what we call semantic AI, which is building semantic rules and applying them. So the difference, of course, I mean, machine learning is very good at finding patterns, not so good about dealing with language and understanding and concepts. Semantic AI is really good at that, and it's the piece that has probably changed more than any other in recent years. The early AI, both machine learning and semantic AI, failed. And they failed mostly, the machine learning failed because the computers just simply weren't powerful enough. They couldn't generate enough of the internals. And Semantic AI failed because they did the wrong kind of rules. They did these very rigid. In order to do this, you should do step 1, step 2, step 3, step. I mean, that just doesn't work very well. It's too rigid. And so what's going on now is machine learning is coming to its fore because the machines are big enough. Semantic AI is coming to its power because it's using different kinds of rules. It's semantic-based rules, trying to understand the language and the patterns within the language. And so it's using, again, that break down patterns versus concepts. And to get really good, going back to the earlier point, to get really good solutions, you need them both.
Hey, Tom, you're hitting on something that's kind of causing me to have a little bit of a PTSD reaction. And in particular, when you're talking about the failure of semantic rules or the apparent failure of semantic rules, I was going to share a quick anecdote, and this goes back a long time ago. This has got to be 25 years ago. I'm not going to name names, but I was employed by a small company that came to the United States out of Europe to try to create a natural language enabled. Remember Clippy, the little animated paperclip from Microsoft? They wanted to create kind of the next generation Clippy for websites, early websites, where they're going to have this little character. We'll call them an avatar character that would sit in the corner of your display. And you could type to that character and ask it a question, and it would navigate you to the website or directly answer a question. And that company was chasing the opportunity for them of a lifetime. They were going to create an animated Ronald McDonald for McDonald's Corporation to put on their website, McDonald's.com at the time. And you could ask Ronald a whole bunch of questions about McDonald's and food and whatever, and it would be able to answer you. But Tom, to your point, that tool was so primitive.
Right.
All it really was a series of hardwired if-then statements.
Right.
If somebody says calories and Big Mac, the answer is 1934.
Right.
Right. And we went on this big sales call. We're gonna win the McDonald's business. And we flew to Chicago. They brought us in the conference room. We did the demo. It went fantastic because we wired it for the script. And then we turned to the people in the audience in the room and we said, who wants to ask Ronald a question? And a guy from the IT department in the back of the room put his hand up and he goes, I want to find out what's inside a chicken McNugget. And that was not something that we built a rule for.
Right.
So the way the constructs were set up, if it was none of those things, supposed to say, gee, I don't know. But for some reason, it didn't. For some reason, it thought one of the rules triggered, and the answer came back. Their founder, Ray Kroc, is inside the chicken McNugget. Let's just say they didn't find it funny. Right? We got kicked out of the deal. We got kicked out of the room. We got kicked out of the building. We got kicked out of the state. Right? And that's what I think of when I think of 25 years ago, semantic rules.
Right.
Right. If it's this, do that.
Yep.
Right. With no fuzziness to that. I'm sure it's come a long way from those days. At least I would pray it has.
Right. It has.
And at least some tools have, right? So I think to one of your earlier questions about like the difference between NLP and NLU.
Yeah.
Processing is a very structured thing. It is often reactive because you have to have a pre-existing library for that to work. Whereas in language understanding, it gets to be more dynamic with language that evolves over time. Like we didn't expect the IT guy to throw out a question about McNuggets, right? So having a pool of language that is ready to adapt and learn and accept those kinds of questions can really go a long way. Does that make sense? Or Tom, do you want to elaborate on?
No, I mean that definitely makes sense. But yeah, so but part of the answer is yes. Semantic rules have gotten a lot better by and large. But they're not, again, none of these things, all the approaches we're talking about are really partial solutions. And the way to get really intelligent solutions is putting them all together. And that's, of course, the key.
Interesting. Interesting. So, Kim, I'm going to ask you to do Tom and I a favor and to give us a little bit of an education on what's really going on under the hood in the Luminoso platform and what makes Luminoso. Because I talk to a dozen people a week about different types of AI applications. And I mentioned Luminoso to them, and there's some amount of awe. There's some amount of, oh, Luminoso. Interesting. I want to know what you think is going on with Luminoso in an under the hood way that makes it different and special. Can you talk for just a few minutes on what you think is really for lack of a better term, the secret sauce going on there?
Yeah. So we have a pre-existing large language model that predates ChatGPT. I think our large language model is like 10-ish. It's an established language model. And we have a transfer learning layer that has been debiased. So when you train a human or a machine on language from the internet, the machine or the human is going to learn the culture and the biases of wherever it learned from, right? Like we're raised in a context, those are our beliefs, and that is our worldview. That is particularly dangerous when you're trying to use it for an enterprise application. And it was trained on like Reddit or Wikipedia. So there was an effort in 2019 to neutralize some of the biases. For example, if we're comfortable with vectors, depending on the audience, and you can message me on LinkedIn if you want to get really into it. I'm going to do a quick metaphor, and you can tell me whether or not it makes sense. We have a vector for king and a vector for queen. If we remove the male part of the king vector, do we get queen or do we get royalty? So if we're trained on language, it will have the opposite effect, but we want it to have a more neutral outcome. So that way we could surface, if we see something a little bit off in the data, we can say, is this from the domain of our employee survey? Is this from the domain of our customer feedback? Or is this just how we think language works? So that's kind of what's special about us. The AI learns from the data what words mean based on this immersion style way of learning. So it looks for things used synonymously or in conjunction with each other. Locally, and Mark and Tom have both been familiar with the research project I did recently here in Portland. Small town vibes, lots of small businesses, streets. The way the Daylight Luminoso platform works, it could differentiate Lombard the street from Lombard House, the bar Brian owns. If you use a classic taxonomy approach, you'd be like, oh, Lombard, similar. Yes, but very, very different issues, right? One has local organizing, one needs better crosswalks. So that's the unique thing about Luminoso.
So are you inferring by this that one approach is, what do they call it, unsupervised learning versus supervised? Tell me where that plays into this.
Yeah, so supervised can be really helpful if you are the expert speaking to and listening to other experts, where you need to level the language, right? So doctors speaking to doctors, we know this chemical is this drug for this treatment. Great. That works really well for supervised because there needs to be one source of truth. I'm sure Tom has an infinite library of all the applications where we want to have that really structured data. But for this more unstructured approach, that's when we are listening, we're doing discovery. We need the data to speak for itself. That's when the neighborhood was really helpful, because we're not going to spend dozens and dozens of hours or thousands and thousands of dollars to build every small business, street, memory, event, news article. Where was the Blockbuster 20 years ago? That was not going to include that in my library to do this neighborhood study. When it's dynamic and we're focusing on listening, so applications where we have focus groups, in-depth interviews, and we're really trying to dig in and understand, well, what are people saying? Not just what is being said.
Mm-hmm.
That's the natural language, good, gritty, juicy stuff that we play with in the engine.
Interesting. Anything to add, Tom, about what you're seeing these days in the market, whether it be on natural language processing or this machine learning techniques that Kim's talking about? Anything that you think we've missed so far that should be surfaced here?
I would say probably the thing that I would add, because going back to the beginning of this, was talking about ChatGPT, which is, and then large language models that it's based on, and so forth. And one of the things that we're seeing is that, as I mentioned, enterprises are struggling to get real value out of it. Why? Because in an enterprise, unlike an application where you're interested in finding out what people are talking about and what sort of sentiment is being expressed, which is something that also happens within the enterprise. But most of the applications, what they're looking for is something that is accurate and consistent, and that's where ChatGPT doesn't really play well. It's not consistent, and the accuracy can be the well-known hallucinations. And so one of the ways that they're trying to overcome that is with RAG, what's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And what that does is that it takes ChatGPT, then it takes traditional search engine output, puts them together by incorporating the output from the regular search back into the ChatGPT, and it works better. The problem there is that RAG only works as well as the search engine that you're using to generate those search links. And we know from the single most common word that people have associated with enterprise search is it sucks. And it has for a very, very long time. And so the RAG only works as well as the search engine that it's using. And that's where text analytics, auto-categorization, data extraction comes into play. Because what you can do with auto-categorization is develop a much more consistent and much more accurate set of results. And that's what we're seeing right now. That is one of the keys to improving it. There's a number of other things with ChatGPT, bias that Kim mentioned, and some others. But the accuracy is absolutely fundamental in an enterprise environment. If you're just trying to get a general sense of what people are saying, accuracy isn't as important. But when you want specific answers, accuracy counts.
Somebody told me recently that, well, these large language model GenAI approaches tend to be reasonably, I'm going to use the term smart, with qualitative information, but really struggle with quantitative data. Doing simple math equations. It could probably design an equation, but it may not be able to tell you that 6 + 6 = 12 every single time you ask for it.
Yeah.
Is that really the case? I mean, am I overstating that, or is that true?
No, it's definitely true. One of the things that is absolutely fundamental to recognize, ChatGPT does not understand anything. There is no understanding in ChatGPT. All it knows is what's the most likely next word, and it doesn't have any sense of causality. It's really good at finding correlations. It has no sense of causality at all.
Wow.
I would throw an asterisk on there, because I think for the example, for Mark saying hyper simplified 6 + 6 + 12, it has been said on the internet that 6 + 6 = 12 probably enough times on the internet where it may not be actually understanding or doing the calculation, but if it is able to surface it, it may often reach that CX good enough. I see someone in the chat mentioned having a similar struggle with Qual, where it struggles with smaller insights.
Mm-hmm.
I think that granularity, if you're getting very specific, I think in the webinar, Tom talked about jailbreaking. Like, how do you get the LLM or ChatGPT to deviate from what is known or what it's supposed to be doing? Like, it can generate some of those basic insights, but it's not going to be forecasting with accuracy, right? Because it's not basing it in true understanding and reality. It's basing it on what was said previously, and that goes back to the debiased effort that Luminoso went through.
Super
Yeah,
interesting.
just to add, one of the things that I loved, because I love to play chess, and one of the things, stories about this that I loved is we asked, or some researchers asked ChatGPT, okay, here's a chess game, and we here's the first moves, and here's the position, and your next move, if you do this, you'll get checkmate. Should I do that or not? Was the question to ChatGPT. Well, we all know the answer. If you play chess, you know the answer. If you can make checkmate, that's it. You win the game. But it came out with this long involved, well, you have to take positional inputs. And so it was looking at patterns of chess games, but had absolutely no understanding of the game itself.
So what I hear you saying is it's a good memorizer, but it may not be a good reasoner.
Mm-hmm.
At least at this stage.
Yeah.
At this stage of its, we'll call it evolution.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, guys, I could sit here and talk with you guys pretty much all afternoon, but we probably have other things that we need to do too. So I'm going to simply wrap this up by not just thanking you guys, which is important to do, but also just to ask you, where can the folks who are out there listening now or through the recording as a follow-up to this, where can they find you? Kim, we'll start with you. Where can people reach out if they want to talk to you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kim Larson, same background and face. You should be able to find me. Or if you want to get as much information as we've put out on the internet previously, Luminoso has a YouTube channel where you can see Tom's face in the thumbnail talking about generative AI. We talk about ethical AI, difference between NLU and NLP, predictive analytics, all of that, local use case studies. Deep dive there, and then reach out to me on LinkedIn for anything that we're missing. I'll make sure it's added.
Okay.
And Tom, how about you?
Yeah, well, short answer, ditto, but not quite, but because we don't have the Luminoso website. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Ramey, but also I have a network of consultants that we formed into a company called CAPS Group. That's with a K, KAPS Group. And so you can get in touch with us or look, both me and CAPS Group are on LinkedIn. And also, as I mentioned, I'm the program chair for a conference called Text Analytics Forum. And it's just now coming almost, we're almost there. There's still time to register, but it's in Washington, D.C. It's combined with a number of other conferences, KM World, Taxonomy Bootcamp, Enterprise Search, Enterprise AI. And so Text Analytics Forum is something that we've been doing now for about 8 years. And we cover all aspects of text analytics, from how to do it to what's the business justification for doing it.
Great. Guys, thank you both for being here and hanging out with me and my friends out there. Guys, as we wrap this up, I'll share one other data point. I'm going to be on another one of these shows in a couple of days, a slightly different show, a little less technical on that one, a show that I call CX Unsung Heroes, another look at customer experience, but through the people doing the work. And in that case, I asked a good friend of mine, her name is Stacy Neville. You may know Stacy from her Prudential work, to join me on that conversation. And we're going to start to unpack some of the things that she's learned in her 20-year career. So guys, thank you for hanging out for a half hour with me. And thank you guys for being here on this journey with us. And with that said, please do reach out to any of us if you have any kind of follow-up you want to talk about, or questions or answers or things you want to add. Would love your input. Make this a beginning of a conversation. Thank you guys for everything, and stay well, my friends. Be well.
Okay. Thank you.